Hello and welcome to Gas Forward, the future of energy and wealth. I'm your host, Yerwang Shambo, and today we have a very special session lined up, one that promises bold insights, expert analysis, and a fresh perspective on Africa's energy future. The theme for today's conversation is Decarbonizing the Seas, LPG and LNG as clean maritime fuels. This isn't just any discussion. We are speaking with a seasoned professional whose depth of experience, knowledge, and leadership in the gas sector is truly unmatched. Today's episode is packed with practical insights, strategic thinking, and a forward-looking view on how gas can drive cleaner, smarter maritime solutions across Africa. And honestly, who better to guide us through this than a true industry veteran, a powerhouse of expertise, our guest for today? So, before we dive right in, we would like to thank our sponsors for today's session. This episode is proudly brought to you by Radiant Money and Bond Voyage. Radiant Money helps you to make intentional, smart, and sustainable financial decisions. Whether you're launching your business, managing multiple income streams, or planning for long term growth, Radiant Money is your go to plug. And Bond Voyage is your trusted partner for premium travel solutions, helping individuals and businesses plan seamless, efficient, and memorable trips both locally and internationally. A huge thank you to Radiant Money and Bond Voyage for supporting bold conversations that truly matter. So, now it's time to introduce our guest for today. But first, I will do the honor of reading out our special guest biography. Mr. Temisan Omatseye, hailing from Warri, Delta State, Nigeria, is a distinguished legal and maritime professional whose career spans several decades in multiple sectors. Educated in the UK, he earned a joint honours BSc in Economics and Politics from the University of Wales and completed his legal training at the Nigerian Law School in 1989. He further advanced his studies with an LLM in maritime law from the London School of Economics in 1990. Returning to Nigeria, Mr. Omatseye began his career as Assistant Legal Advisor at the Federal Ministry of Transport, Lagos. He went on to found and lead Polmas Limited, Polmas Engineering Services Limited, and Polmas Logistics Services Limited, specializing in marine transportation, logistics, and engineering. His work includes major projects such as coordinating raw material logistics for the Ajaokuta Steel Company and managing midstream discharge operations for the Nigerian Liquefied Natural Gas Company, NLNG Construction. In public service, Mr. Omatseye served as Director General/CEO of the Nigerian Maritime Administration and Safety Agency, NIMASA, from July 2009 to December 2010. He also held national appointments, including the President of the African Ship Owners Association from 2015 to 2016 and board member of the Nigerian Chamber of Shipping from 2021. He is a fellow of the Chartered Institute of Logistics and Transport and the Chartered Institute of Transport Administration of Nigeria, and a ranked legal practitioner through his membership in the Nigerian Bar Association. Mr. Omatseye's breadth of experience from law and policy to engineering to logistics and maritime regulation makes him uniquely placed to lead today's conversation on the future of gas, shipping, and decarbonization. Let's welcome Mr. Temisan Omatseye. It's such a great joy and honor to have you here at the Doowegas Podcast Speaker Series. Thank you so much, sir, for taking your time to be with us today.
Thank you, Yerwang, and thank you for the honor granted me to be in your presence this morning.
You're welcome, sir. Thank you for joining us. Okay, so now we are stepping into the heart of today's conversation, the part where we learn, where we listen, and we draw real industry knowledge and insights from our seasoned industry expert, the former DG of NIMASA. So, sir, can you kindly confirm, can we proceed? Are you ready for us today?
Yes, I am very much ready.
All right, sir. Thank you. So, Mr. Omatseye, you've had a distinguished career in maritime leadership and advisory roles. How has this shaped, your view of Africa's energy transition at sea?
Well, my position, quite simply, is been that of, like you have said, I've not only been a maritime lawyer, I've also been an operator in the industry, and then become a regulator, which has basically given me three-eyed perspective into the industry. And my quite understanding of this is that the issue of transition is energy transition as it relates to natural gas being used as a replacement for fossil fuel, or let's just say diesel and LPFO, has not been quite encouraging for Africa. And quite simply, it's because, the truth be said, the lack of ownership of vessels by Africans. So we in Africa do not own vessels that we can basically say categorically we are now moving towards a transition. And the challenge one face, as you may be very aware, international shipping is one of the most regulated industries in the world, and therefore, as the bar begins to move, it becomes more difficult for many African ship owners to have the commercial side to actually acquire these vessels. So we cannot speak very strongly on present day the ability of Africa as a whole to participate, because right now it's a lack of ownership. But that does not mean that going forward the opportunities are not there, and those are the opportunities we need to begin to look at moving forward in line. Basically looking now at the issues of African Free Trade Agreement and things like that. So definitely there is need for us to begin to look at going. That we are not there now does not mean we cannot get there moving forward.
Thank you so much, sir, for that such a grounded perspective. So, moving on, sir, building on that, with MIO emissions targets approaching, how ready is Africa, particularly Nigeria, to decarbonize its maritime sector?
Like I've said, we are not, like I said, have the ownership, but definitely we do have a lot of international vessels which are calling into Nigerian and other African ports, and therefore there is need for us to carefully monitor their emission in line with what is required by the IMO. As you may be aware, there's the IMO regulation which provides for a certain percentage of sulfur contents in the fuel oil and diesel that is being used. But where we are and where we should be going is looking at, especially with the abundance of resources, most especially gas, how do we begin to transition from the fossil fuel to the very sweet crude oil that we have that allows for such low sulfur content and also assists in basically the decarbonization and reducing of greenhouse gas emissions.
Thank you. Fantastic insight. Thanks for sharing that, sir. So, Mr. Omatseye, why are LPG and LNG emerging as the most practical transition fuels today compared to options like hydrogen or ammonia?
Well, it's always been said that LNG or gas in general is the transition fuel. The final destination, nobody has told us. The idea of hydrogen and ammonia has been floated. But right now, those are not being looked at as commercially. We've not gotten to a stage where it can be used commercially, internationally. Because, as you know, if you look at the map of vessels around the world, it's quite big. And therefore, it's going to be an issue of supply and demand. Which is actually what is affecting even the LNG as we talk about the transition. Right now, LPG in itself, yes, we look at it more as a cooking gas, but you must also understand something on vessels, the issue of space for storage. Hence the need that people are looking more towards LNG in the interim, because it is more of a compressed gas, not CNG, but you are able to hold more quantity in the liquefied form, especially in the lowest temperature that you have in them, and all you just need is a heat exchanger to regasify. So the focus more on shipping, I believe, is more on LNG rather than LPG, in my own understanding of it. But the challenge which you have is the ability you have sufficient of the LNG. Most of the LNG which is being used around the world are being used for industrial purposes, being delivered worldwide. But then as time begins to go on, there's need for us to begin to look at how can we begin to translate that into domestic shipping and international shipping.
Thank you, sir. Thank you. I think that really frames the practicality behind today's fuel choices, especially for a region balancing cost, technology, and reliability. Thank you for sharing that. So, sir, from your experience, what are the key safety and regulatory considerations for LPG slash LNG bunkering and vessel operations?
Well, my challenge with LNG basically is LPG in the first instance as a gas, and I stand to be corrected because I'm sure many of your people here are expert in this. My understanding of LPG is that it's quite flammable in the sense that when it gets into the air and it catches flame. So on the issue of safety, that could be a bit difficult on board a vessel where you have a lot of sparks in the engine room, and that could also be a safety concern. But the difference in LNG, quite simply, is that LNG is a gas which is stored at minus 40 or minus, it's a very low, it's almost like frozen gas kind of stuff. And the moment it gets into the air, it basically evaporates, it disappears. And so therefore, the issue of safety for LNG is not that much. So therefore, what normally happens is that when you have your ISO tanks in your engine and the LNG is being pumped through, you need a heat exchanger to heat it up, to regasify that, to allow it to move into the engines to run. So my own thinking is that LNG still, in my own perspective, still remains the fuel of choice for the shipping industry rather than LPG. LPG should focus more on it, and then we have the CNG to focus on the compressed natural gas. And remember also the issue of storage. You are able to store more LNG in the ISO tanks than you can on CNG. And also the issue of LPG. And the also issue of travel distance. You're able to transport or travel with LNG for a longer distance of time and for a longer period of time. So that also is an area which goes quite well with the shipping. But like you've said, we cannot escape the use of fossil fuel because first of all, you need a bit of gas or fuel oil to heat up the heat exchanger to convert the LNG to vapor form for it to work. So you will find out that you are actually using about 80% of LNG to 20% of fuel oil because you still need to heat up the heat exchanger for the gas to come through. But you find out what is happening now, especially in the shipping industry, most engines which are being built are dual fuel engines. So they are running on both LNG and fuel oil. And the reason quite simply is that, like you may ask, is the issue of bunker fuel. We've got this situation whereby we don't have sufficient refueling stations of LNG around the world. So, well, of course, we don't want the ship to get midstream and get stuck and then begin to float all over the place.
Thank you so much, sir, for sharing. Safety and regulation, are truly the backbone of any real transition, and your clarity shows here how essential structured framework for progress. Thank you, sir. So, moving on, sir, do you see more opportunity in retrofitting existing vessels or building new LPG slash LNG powered fleets?
Well, I am of the opinion right now, and maybe it's my own perspective of it. Right now, in Africa or in Nigeria specifically, and Africa in general, we have low ownership, like I mentioned, of vessels, and even the vessels that we have, most owners lack the financial capability to buy the modern type of vessels which are meeting because the rules are being changed on an annual basis or likewise by the IMO. And so you begin, as an owner, which I have been, you begin to look at the issue of commercial and regulatory. Think, God, I need to make money. But then in making money, you are not meeting up the regulatory requirement in the sense that the vessels that you have are too old and sometimes some ports will not even allow you to come into it. So those are the constraints which many African countries are facing when it comes to whatever. So the issue of retrofitting, that's quite a difficult one because the cost of retrofitting is quite high. So I am of the opinion very strongly that the best option we have is basically to go into, as a continent, into a fleet renewal strategy whereby standards are set, and in setting those standards, insistence is put on the issue of the engines, because the engines are designed now that are dual fuel, that can run on both LNG, and if you notice, most of the steamships that which is being phased out by the LNG owners, basically are mainly dual fuel. So they run on LNG and fuel oil. But now most of the new LNG vessels now are running 100% on LNG, because they do a back refueling from the cargo they have on board in case they run out. But if your vessel does not have any LNG, if you're not carrying, you're carrying just fuel oil, and you make it purely LNG, then the moment you run out, you're stuck, because you need to get refueled by the LNG vessel. So I believe that going forward, rather than us looking at retrofitting the vessels, which already are old, most of the vessels that are being purchased by African shipowners are old, I would suggest that we go into a fleet buyback situation whereby we buy modern vessels, new vessels that are futuristic, that are basically running on dual fuel. Definitely, there's no way you can take the likes of fossil fuel, LPF and diesel out of the market. That will not happen very quickly. But then we need to also show that, at least in the worst case scenario, if we are steaming 50% on gas and 50%. That also in itself reduces greenhouse gas emission by 50%. But maybe the 100% achievement may be very, very tough.
Thank you, sir. Thank you. That was actually very insightful. I'm sure that anyone listening right now is definitely taking down notes, and that really just, highlights the strategic choices operators, must make in the industry. Thank you so much, sir, for sharing. We are already halfway through, and the depth of your insight has been really enriching. Thank you so much, sir, for sharing once again. And once again, thank you to our sponsors, Radiant Money and Bon Voyage, for powering today's session. Mr. Omatseye, infrastructure remains a constraint, in the industry. So, what investments are needed at African to enable LPGs like LNG adoption?
Well, and this is a concern I have, and I believe it's something which we need to look at, and other African countries are looking at. Africa has always been the source of raw material, be it iron ore, be it cobalt, be it bauxite, and whatever else. And we've always been shipping out our raw material out, and not processing it to semi-finished or finished stage, which will give us additional value. And I'm happy right now that African leaders are changing their line of thoughts right now, especially in line with many organizations coming up. Leaders are now saying that we will not get value. And you look at what is happening in the lives of cocoa and other produce, which is happening. And I think we're facing the same situation with gas. Now, I'll give you an example of the likes of the NLNG. LNG was basically constructed purely for export purposes, and it was built, the ports were, the jetties were built to receive large LNG carriers, and there was no provision for them to look at the domestic market. And maybe at that time, maybe there was lack of, not as much usage of LNG within the Nigerian market. But if you look at it, there are other companies which have come up, like Greenville, which are producing in Emoha, which is producing the same LNG, but focusing a lot more on the local market, because we find that the gas is a lot cheaper than the fossil fuel, and whatever the case may be, and you can use it longer. You look at the likes for LNG, and LNG is built on basically exporting and infrastructural investments which you must have in those receiving countries are gas reception facilities. And the gas reception facility is quite expensive. But if you look across the West and Central Africa, even in Africa, nobody has built any gas reception facility. So you need to, the ports, first of all, that is loading the LNG are not built to receive small vessels in the first instance. So they have to carry it in large vessels. And also you require, at the other end, reception facilities whereby you can discharge into those. Because of low usage, of course, people will think the investment is too much and therefore we're not going to do that, or whatever the case may be. But now what is happening with the case of virtual pipeline right now, there is need for infrastructural development. I mean, we're looking at, even in the IMO regulation, there's what they call the green ports, okay, whereby a vessel comes alongside of the port, it switches off on its engine, and power is provided by the ports authority directly. And those power that is provided, that first of all is the green side. But then there's no point in using a generator to provide that power, because again, that generator is also emitting into the air. So therefore, we need to look at how those generators that are the ports are going to be running on natural gas and also reduce the emission. So these are the things we do. So the issue of gas facility, but we also need to realize something. We don't necessarily have to build, gas reception facilities that will cost you $500 million. LNG needs to step down, and this is what needs to do. We can begin to produce LNG into ISO tanks, the small ISO tanks, whereby we can do from LNG directly to the source. So, for instance, now, rather than me loading a 200,000 ton of vessel, LNG can step down and begin to produce into small ISO tanks, which is like 30 tons and can be loaded like a small container on the back of a vessel, and those can be carried by trucks and delivered from LNG directly to the customer. So I call it a door-to-door delivery. So that can reduce the issue, but then the main LNG itself needs to step down its production processes to allow for the filling up of those small LNG ISO tanks. That doesn't even stop in Nigeria. It can also happen in other West African countries where you can do maybe 500 of these ISO tanks and deliver to the likes of Ghana, which they can use to power their own power plants by using it to sell. Because what is happening as a virtual, I've seen plants in Brazil, I've seen plants in Argentina, which are running, and these are 500 megawatts power. They don't have any pipelines running there, but they are running purely on virtual power, on virtual pipeline. And this is what we need to begin to look at as an interim. So as demand begins to increase and people begin to realize the commercial viability of building LNG reception facility, then we can go there. But in the interim, if we want to succeed, we can start developing ISO tanks, begin to load those ones and begin to share them. I've seen this happen all over in Europe, in Portugal, and all over the place, and I don't see why we cannot introduce that.
Thank you so much, sir. Thank you. I know that when the NLNG operators and staff, if they listen to this podcast, there's so much to learn, so much to take away. And truly, infrastructure really is the make or break factor. And your view gives, a clear picture of what future-ready ports must look like. So thank you so much for sharing that.
Just as an addition, I did realize that LNG did want to make an effort towards domestic gas supply, LNG supply. But, it's be difficult because they will have to make some investments to cover it. But unfortunately, the strategy, I tried to be involved in that, but I refused to tell them the strategy. But then the strategy which they had, I knew that it would not work. So I didn't want to participate because they did not set up a strategy which would allow for such. And it can be done. They wanted to come to the domestic market. There is demand. I'm sure you realize the majority of the challenges, there are two challenges we face in our power supply right now. It's lack of gas being delivered to the power plants, the GenCos. And not only that, the problem is getting those gas to those places. Virtual pipeline by virtue of LNG, which is what, if you look at the likes of Doowe Cement in Sokoto, they are running on virtual pipeline. They are running LNG from Greenville all the way up there. And they're setting up, if you go to Greenville, they've set up also a plant in Shagamu where they're also regasifying as well. So it is a doable situation, but then nobody wants to start using gas today and then get halfway down the stream and then decide they don't have whatever and then run back again to whatever. Consistent supply would allow the demand to increase and more people want to get involved in the utilization of gas.
Thank you, sir. Thank you. So, if I may ask, Mr. Omatseye, many companies worry about cost. So, what are the strongest commercial incentives or business opportunities for adopting LPG/LNG marine fuels in Africa?
But like I said, like you said, it's a cost thing, and in my own opinion, it is no matter what infrastructure you have, you're going to cost it. But it is key for the end user to look at what are the cost savings I'm making. And I have done studies on this, and I found out that there's a major cost savings in the EU based on the gas prices, okay, in comparison to diesel price. As you're aware, the price of natural gas is not as high as whatever. That's why they keep talking CNG, you can get it for 400 naira per liter. That's because the gas price here is reasonably okay. Now, if I am buying a gas at $1.20, hypothetically, I'm buying $1, and I'm able to process and everything and still sell it at $11, that is still a major, that's delivered, that's LNG. That is still a major savings for the end buyer. And I can assure you, with the kind of financials we've done, we're looking at good returns. We're looking at returns on investment of almost 25 to 26%. And also we're looking at payback time between 4.6. That is bringing in the kind of equipment I'm talking about. Of course, I'll not tell you the equipment yet because I don't know who's listening. I might go and take my ideas. But then we have been able to see, especially if you're taking the likes of, I'm even giving $1.20 of flare gas, or pipeline gas, and still working the maths with this and the end delivery cost. And naturally, of course, you're going to use gas delivery truck, and we must commend Dangote for what he's doing on CNG vehicles, or CNG trucks. That still gives you a return on investment of about, I think we worked it at about 24 to 26%, which is quite good, which is reasonable, which is almost almost close to the present interest rate. And in addition to that, you have a good payback time. But the issue is getting the investors or the financiers in. And the expectation, quite simply, is that we rely too much on Western financing, and we need to begin to focus a lot more on funding for Africa. And that is where we believe the likes of Afro-Exim steps in to see how they can support our decarbonization policies.
Thank you. It's encouraging, to see how commercial opportunity and environmental responsibility can actually align in this space. So thank you for sharing.
But let me even add a further thing. Sorry for stepping in on this. Remember, I'm only talking of the 24 to 26% on return on investment based on buying the gas at, say, $1.50 or even $1.60 per standard cubic feet, okay, per scoff. Now, you must also realize that if you are picking up a flared gas, okay, you are also able to get your carbon credit as well. So that's additional profit for you. And then also you can look at the green fund to support that. So really, apart from the profitability you're making on one side, there's also the possibility of you getting green carbon credits and also whatever the case. And we're facing a challenge because most banks, most international financial institutions, I've been to some in Africa, who are refusing to finance oil and gas projects because they are saying they're trying to move to cleaner fuel. Now, the issue is that how do you separate gas from oil? Because when you're drilling the gas, you get associated. When you're drilling the oil, you get associated gas. So those are the parts of the game. I'm not a financial person, but those are part of the game we're trying to understand.
Thank you, sir, for sharing, for adding that to all you've said. So, sir, are there existing success stories or pilots in Nigeria or Africa that demonstrate the feasibility of LPG/LNG powered shipping?
LPG, it's very interesting. Demand for LPG has been growing quite tremendously. And that is based on, I guess, marketing and people trying to reduction in and people trying to cut down on firewood, environmental issue, which is good in itself. But I believe that the initial challenge which the likes of LNG had was basically the markets, and the market, I believe, is growing. But then you must also realize the issue of transportation, which will come back to this. How do I load? I mean, like I told you, the design of the likes of LNG is designed for large vessels to receive. And we must also commend LNG for their CSR, whereby they're able to charter large vessels from the likes of Temile himself as part of their own support to provide LNG to the Nigerian markets. But I mean, these are things that they are doing, but I mean, we need to see how we can expand that. So LPG in itself will have to grow. But unfortunately, the development of many of our estates, the new estates that are being built, they are not taking into consideration pipe gas. Estates, they're building housing estates now, and naturally what should be done is that what do we do about pipe gas so that people can be in their houses and then you just deliver one truckload of LPG and it's piped and it's metered like you do in the UK or in the US where you're paying gas based on usage. So we do not have that. Now, for the LNG side of things, what is happening quite a bit is that people are using a bit more of it. The availability, we're only dependent right now on the likes of Greenville, who are just basically supplying, and they are only trucking, which is okay. They have no choice to do that right now because there's no other infrastructure to do the LNG supply. But in my own opinion, strongly of the view that and that is my personal, and I'll tell you what my own thinking is. My own opinion, quite simply, is that we're having, especially in the power sector, and that is when you talk about the availability of money. The challenge we're facing right now, if you're aware, I think Nigeria is generating about 13,000 megawatts of power. And unfortunately, we are only able to transmit about 5,000 or thereabouts. Why? Because the national grid is it's not working, because every time you put additional power on a national grid, then you now hear, oh, national grid has collapsed because it cannot take the amount of power. The building of national grid, that is a transmission line, it's something that takes a long period of time and is a major investment. And I've suggested to government that rather than them, sitting down and basically depending on large gencos, there is a strong possibility for us to generate powers at the substations, because we already have a delivery line from the substations to the houses. That's the discos. As the likes of the Eco Electricity, Ibadan Electricity, they are able to distribute. So if they are able, they depend a lot more on power coming in from the TCN transmission company, which is Genco, into the whatever. If we're having difficulty, then and we have easier access from the disco, so why don't we set up mini LNG power plants using virtual pipeline to generate power at the substations to give power, so that we can use that as a process while government begin to develop the national grid.
Thank you for sharing. Thank you. It's good to know that the continent isn't, starting from zero. So thank you, sir. So finally, sir, looking ahead, do you believe LPG and LNG will remain long-term solutions or stepping stones toward future fuels like hydrogen and methanol?
Well, in my own opinion, as a Nigerian, I would be pushing a lot more for LNG. Reason quite simply is because Nigeria, and I'm sure you're aware of, is a gas country with a little bit of oil in it. And therefore, we need to be pushing a lot more and supporting whatever it is. I am believing that the PIA allows for the drilling of more gas wells, and hopefully that will bring in more investors. Rather than depending on associated gas, we can begin to drill direct gas well. I mean, you take the example of Qatar. Qatar was oil producing, and over time, they are now the largest, I think one of the largest LNG producers in the world. And you can see what gas can do. And we do have reserves that we can do that. So I believe very strongly that a lot should be pushed on drilling gas. Now, remember, when you drill the gas, you get the heavies. So you get the propane, and then the butane, and then, of course, you have the methane. So hopefully then when they separate the propane and the butane, you get your LPG, which allows you to increase your domestic gas usage while you convert what we call the lean gas, methane, to begin to use to produce your methanol and your other things that needs to be produced. And you can see quite clearly what Dangote is doing. Dangote is doing a lot of, gas is a major feedstock for their fertilizer plant. He's increasing production. I believe some of the challenges he has actually the production is actually the gas supply. But I believe that with more investment coming into the gas section, he will be able to meet up his quantity. And I hear very soon he may be the largest producer of urea, not only in Nigeria but worldwide. But that is very dependent on more investment into gas production. He already has the ELP, the Escovos Lagos pipeline, where he can move his gas to. So he can get the gas if there's a lot more push for investment into the drilling of natural gas.
Sir, I think there's something you mentioned while you were speaking, and you said something that really it drew my attention back to our last conference at the NLCGA conference, the 15th edition. I think I remember Mr. Barrister Ismail Ahmed, the head of PICNG initiative, something like that in Abuja. I remember he said something about Nigeria is an oil company, is an oil country with gas. I think I'm paraphrasing what he said actually, because most people.
It's a gas country with a little bit of oil.
Thank you. What he said. Yes. So yeah, thank you for that. I think this has been such an enlightening conversation, sir. Your insights on maritime regulation, LPG and LNG as transition fuels, and Africa's energy future are invaluable. Thank you so much once again for sharing your decades of experience and practical guidance. I'm sure that our listeners will leave with a clearer understanding of Africa's maritime decarbonization opportunities. And also, it's truly been an honor hosting you, sir, and we look forward to having you again in future. Thank you so much, sir.
Thank you very much, Yerwang, and I sincerely appreciate the time. And I hope whatever I've said would at least be able to assist those in the private sector and public sector to see how we can drive this and improve things very much in Nigeria. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you so much, sir. And thank you to all our listeners for tuning into Gas Forward, the future of energy and wealth, powered by Doowegas. So subscribe to our YouTube channel, follow us on LinkedIn and Instagram, Doowegas. Also, feel free to visit www.doowe.ng to learn more and to partner with us. We are open for business. And also, if you would love to be a guest speaker on our podcast speaker series, please do well to send an email to doowegas@gmail.com. So until next time, let's keep learning, let's keep building and pushing energy forward. Once again, I'm Yerwang Shambo, and this is Doowegas guest speaker series, Gas Forward. See you in the next episode. Thank you for joining.
Thank you.